Hello and welcome to the Pondering Papaya podcast for your preview of the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. Stretching out over 4.9 kilometers and 63 laps, the Imola circuit is one of the most historic locations in F1 history. And even though this particular Grand Prix has only existed since 2020, the circuit itself is steeped in legacy and known to be a driver's favourite. Joining me to preview the 7th round of the 2024 F1 season is F1 journalist Rory Mitchell and the Grid Gab's Paul Landry. So let's get straight into it. So joining me now is Rory and Paul. First of all, huge thanks to both of you for joining. How are we doing today, Rory? I'll start with you. How are you looking forward to Imola?
Good, yeah. It's a normal weekend instead of a sprint one. We've had two in a row, so it's nice to get back to some normality in the world of F1.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's been a bit of an odd time with two back-to-back sprints. What about you, Paul? Is Imola a circuit you look forward to?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a proper race circuit, isn't it? It's got the heritage. There's so much leading into it. You've got, McLaren, Ferrari neck and neck at the moment, and both, poising a challenge to Red Bull. So there's so much looking forward to it. I'm really geared up for this one.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah, this is sort of the kickstarting the European run, which is sort of when we start seeing teams bring their major upgrades. Yes, we saw McLaren bring some last time, but yeah, Ferrari, of course, we'll get into that as well. I'm not going to read you the ridiculously long name of the circuit, but I would.
Go on.
Okay, the official name of this Grand Prix. Forget Emilia Romagna. Forget Imola GP. It's called the Formula One MSC Cruises Gran Premio del Made in Italy del Emilia Romagna 2024. Which just flows off the tongue. Probably the best name on the whole calendar.
The sponsors got their money's worth right there.
They did, yeah. My favourite part is the Made in Italy. Like, why is that in there? it's sort of just been chucked in there. Like, oh yeah, don't forget this is also in Italy. So, yes, of course, it's Imola. I mean, it's quite interesting that this is only the third running of this particular Grand Prix because obviously we've got the Italian Grand Prix of Monza late in the year, but this got added sort of properly in 2020. We were supposed to go there last year. Obviously, if anyone remembers, it was a very wet time of year this time last year. And myself, I was in the airport about to go to Imola. I was literally in the little bit. No, I was through security. I was in the bit where you're queuing up to go onto the airplane when I got the heads up saying it's cancelled. So I did the odd thing of leaving an airport, and pretty much everyone asked me, "Have you missed your flight?" And I was like, "No, it's a much bigger thing than that." So thankfully, I mean, there is a bit of rain this year, but it's looking a little bit dry at least. At least we're going to have a bit more racing action than we did last year. So, as I said, we've had 3 races of this event so far. Verstappen's won 2 of them. Hamilton's won the other. But let's kick on to Lando. He's sort of the place to start, really. He's raced at Imola 3 times. He's got 2 P3s and a P8, which is obviously very good. We've had the first day, and this is what Lando said going into the weekend.
I think we are just better suited to Imola, potentially the upgrade a little bit as well. Imola's generally been one of our most successful tracks as a team, and for me as a driver. So I would like to say so. I think we've definitely took a step forward. From what I know, other teams have upgrades too. So I don't think we're getting ahead of ourselves. I know I've put good confidence forward to the team. I've said that we're confident we can take steps forward, but I think I made it clear that we're not going to be there every weekend. I was still 6th at the time, and I'm always honest. I'm happily going to say that I was lucky last weekend with the safety car, and the strategy worked out perfectly, but that's how races go sometimes. So I wasn't just first because I was the quickest at the time, but I was quickest on track, and I think that was the first good sign we had, and then it turned into something more. But we were quickest at the time on track, and I think the whole weekend was turning into something good, and we were showing that the car made some good steps forward. But we need more if we're going to challenge Ferrari more consistently. We're going to challenge Red Bull more consistently, but the team are doing a great job. They made some good steps, and we have more things hopefully coming in the future, and those are what we need to be there more often.
I'm just going to sort of dissect what he said in the press conference today. It was typical Lando, wasn't it, Roy? I mean, I'll hand over to you on this one because he was very excited for the win, but it wouldn't be a Lando Norris quote if he wasn't also massively pessimistic and saying they are very much still the third best team. What did you make of what Lando said?
Yeah, I mean, he sort of does the usual sort of beating himself down a bit, doesn't he? He's, self-deprecating. But I think, yeah, he made some interesting comments really about how the team has improved in every area. To sort of get to the point where he's managed to win a race. And you look at, he said they're not a mile off; they're more like 1 or 2 tenths off Red Bull, and a lot of that is down to, his work that he's done in the off season. To be better at qualifying, and then they've sort of mimicked Ferrari, I think, in trying to improve their weekend execution. You've sort of seen really how they've approached like different sessions, and I think that's sort of all contributed really to how they've been able to sort of get sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? To
Consistent.
minimize this gap
Yeah,
to Red Bull.
minimise. Yeah, exactly
And-
right. I think. Yeah, sorry. Continue. I interrupted you.
No, yeah, so minimise the gap to Red Bull, and as I say, like me Ferrari. So look at if you look at what they've done, they've sort of focused on 3 key pillars, haven't they? Strategy, make the car easier to drive for their drivers, and weekend execution. And I think that's kind of where this is. This is all culminated in the win for Norris, and they've got this big upgrade package, McLaren for Miami, and we should see whether or not that will translate.
Yeah, definitely. It was interesting what Norris in particular said about the upgrades. Because obviously, I think Imola is a circuit that's done McLaren in particular very well over the years. Like I said, Lando Norris got 2 podiums out of 3 years here. Like by all accounts, McLaren should be very strong here, and yet he was still sort of trying to say that Ferrari are also going to be very good because obviously Ferrari have got a huge upgrade package as well. But what do you make of sort of first of all Norris's chances this weekend, but also McLaren's? Like, do you think they're going to be as quick as they were in Miami, or do you think it's going to be Ferrari up ahead again?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think McLaren have so much momentum. Lando Norris, he's got this monkey off his back. He's charged himself up, and he's got this newfound belief in himself, and himself, and also Piastri. They just have to absolutely go for it because, Ferrari, it's kind of a home from home, I guess you could say, for them, and they've got a lot to prove, particularly Sainz. So Lando just has to absolutely go for it and not worry about anyone else. Try and get as much ground at the start as possible. Even try and start at the first row of the grid if you can. I think it's probably might be safe to say Max is going to start from pole, but we never know. I think he's got an excellent chance. I think we can expect a podium, 3rd place minimum, I think. And in regards to the updates and everything, I think they've got, like you said, they've got even more to bring. Their full package, and Piastri's got a full update package now. So I think the pair of them, I think they've just got to absolutely go for it and just focus on themselves.
Yeah, we'll get onto Piastri a little bit because obviously he sort of had part of the upgrades in Miami. They weren't all ready in time, so obviously they gave him to Norris, and he'll get them full in this time. But it's just sticking on Norris for the time being. Rory, what do you think this win does? Because obviously he himself spoke very vocally of how he didn't want to be called Lando No Wins anymore, and he was sort of sick of these things just being planted on him. Like, do you think we're going to see a change in him as a driver now? Is he going to be? I mean, I suppose a parallel you could sort of compare to was after Verstappen got his first world title, which obviously, yes, it's a world title, but it's still a big change compared to a win. He was almost a completely different driver, wasn't he? He sort of went from this really aggressive driver, really quite rash at times, to this completely like perfectionist who does everything absolutely perfect all the time. I'm not saying Norris is going to have that kind of transformation, but do you think we'll see a little bit of a more confident Norris going into a race weekend?
I think so. I think a win always ends up, making a driver more confident just about their ability and sort of the work that they've been doing behind the scenes. And you look at Norris, in particular, this is 110th start with McLaren in Miami, and that actually totals Hamilton's total amount of races he did with McLaren throughout the 2007 through to 2012. So, and he got sort of wins pretty early on in his McLaren career, didn't he? And that sort of catapulted him into that title challenge in 2008. So I'm not saying we're going to see Lando all of a sudden challenging for the title, but it'll manifest itself, I think. All this work that he's doing with the team, and this sort of newfound confidence he'll have in his own ability will certainly help him on his way to putting the fight up to Max.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting you touched on that because another bit from the press conference, he said he was asked if the season started now, do you think you'd be in contention for a title fight? And Klaus Norris, being Norris, is sort of hesitant to say yes. But I think a lot of people, including myself included, think that they are much closer to Red Bull than they've ever been at the moment. Like, yes, we saw last year they were very close towards the back half of the year, but I think this early in the season with their first real upgrade package, it's a very promising sign, isn't it, Paul? That they can only get better from here. Red Bull, we don't know where their ceiling is, but currently they're a lot closer than we've seen the last few years. Like, signs are good, basically, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the gap is definitely smaller. Red Bull's a very different team to what we found from last year. We've seen that Red Bull has just been kind of imploding, I suppose, since the start, with all sorts of stuff going around in the media. McLaren need to take full advantage of this and understand that they can just pick up points wherever they can. I think the major fight for them, for McLaren this year, is going to be to stay on top of Ferrari and try and secure that second place. And I think I don't want to be a bit of a negative, Nigel. I think championships is probably well out of reach still. But if they can just keep Ferrari at bay, keep them locked into third, and just keep that second place, first of all, get past Ferrari to start with. But if they can lock up that second place, they'll be in a fantastic position to take on 2025 and also 26 with the reg changes as well.
Yeah, you're right. It's a huge jump from where they were this time last year, obviously much before those Austria upgrades. Let's move on to the other driver then, Oscar Piastri. I'm going to ask both a quiz question. So obviously you know that Oscar Piastri has never driven at Imola in F1. Yes, he's done a test recently. He's also done some other races there. But which other driver is having his debut at Imola this weekend?
Is it Logan Sargent?
Fair enough, Logan Sargent, it doesn't count, but he's not the one I'm thinking of. Which other sort of surprise driver? Yes, Logan Sargent will also count, but there's one that is a very big surprise that he's never driven an Imola before.
Oh, I'm gonna go for this. I'm gonna look thick as anything if I get it wrong. But is it Daniel Ricciardo?
Oh, it's not, unfortunately. It's a good guess. I'll put you out of your misery. It's actually Nico Hülkenberg, which I was very surprised to learn that. He's never driven Imola. Exactly. You'd think he must have been at some point, but no. This will be his 26th new circuit of his career. Somehow missed Imola so far. But anyway, Piastri's not quite at 26 different circuits, but knowing F1 will be there in no time. But let's move on to him a little bit. Like I mentioned, he's getting the full works this weekend. Last time out in Miami, he sort of had half the upgrades, but a lot of it was the old car still. Hence why there's a bit of a gap in terms of performance. But he himself said this year's upgrade is not quite as big as last year. Like, are we expecting Piastri to be up on the same level as Norris this weekend now they've got similar cars again? Or do you think Norris's ability, Rory, has sort of gone a step ahead this year so far?
Yeah, I think Piastri, last time out, he actually was quite strong in Miami. I mean, you look at where he was ahead of Lando, wasn't he, in the spring qualifying? I think Lando said I think he said in the press conference, actually, if he had a better Friday, he probably could have been on pole. So, I think Piastri's sort of always thereabouts. And, you look at that crash he had with Sainz, it wasn't his fault. So, you wonder what would have happened in the race if he'd have, if he'd have been also if he would have also sort of benefited from the safety car, what he could have done, whether or not he could have got another podium for them. So he's there or thereabouts, to use the sporting term, I think, Piastri. And, yeah, I think he's just chipping away. But Norris is obviously the team leader, so he's got that experience with them, and yeah, I think that's the reason why you're seeing him sort of just edging on the weekend so far.
And I want to sort of talk about that relationship a little bit, because obviously I think Piastri shocked everyone, maybe except the people in McLaren last year when he came in and did so well, was instantly challenging Norris. Whereas this year, I think it's fair to say Norris has had the beating of him quite handily, really. I don't know the exact stats off the top of my head, but off the top of my head, I think Norris has been ahead quite often. Paul, do you think there's a danger of Piastri sort of being in the shadow of Norris? Because there was a lot of talk going into the year that this is a team where you've got two drivers who are sort of on an even keel, and that's not something we always get in F1. I'm looking at Red Bull, obviously, with Max's top and stuff like that. But as the season and as the race has gone on, of course, with this win as well for Norris, is Piastri in the danger of just falling a little bit behind Norris compared to where he was last year?
I think that's entirely down to him, isn't it? I think he needs to remember perhaps where he is, although he's only a year younger than Norris, which is amazing, actually. It's only his second year. as a full-time driver, so he has to kind of use this opportunity to recognise where he is and perhaps take this chance to learn from the people around him. As Rory said, Norris is the more senior driver here. He's the team leader, and just take this chance just to take every opportunity to learn everything, learn from mistakes as well, of course, because let's face it, Norris has made mistakes, and take this all on board, implement it, and just use it as a catalyst so that when the opportunity does come, Piastri can take absolutely full advantage of this. Because we said that this weekend's going to be dry. I haven't looked at the forecast, but you never know, and you never know what surprises could happen, later down the line as well. But I think his head is screwed on enough. I think it seems to not let little things and little jealousies and little things of, oh, he's got to win and I haven't, get to him. To be honest, he seems like a very down to earth kind of guy.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I've often described him as the Australian Kimi Räikkönen, just a little bit nicer, but completely unfazed by absolutely everything. Let's sort of discuss the pecking order a bit then, away from McLaren, but also general, really. Like, by the sounds of listening to both of you, it sounds like you sort of all agree that it's going to be Red Bull, Ferrari, and McLaren up in the mix. But we're sort of talking about those two teams behind, really. And like, at the start of the season, you would have definitely said that McLaren were in a fight with Mercedes and Aston Martin. It seems now that they've moved ahead of those two. Is that something you'd agree with, Rory, or do you think we could see a McLaren-esque performance from one of those two I mentioned?
No, I think McLaren are the third best team at the moment. You look at Ferrari as well; they've got the big upgrade package this weekend, so that will probably put them ahead, if not on par with what McLaren were showing in Miami in terms of pace. And then Aston Martin sort of seem to be stuck in this, I don't know, this kind of like sort of performance ceiling, if you like, where they don't really, they had a nightmare weekend in Miami, and they're struggling to sort of replicate what they were doing at the start of last season. And then Mercedes, who knows, with those guys, they're every other weekend they've got some sort of problem with the car and are chasing this sort of setup, aren't they? So yeah, I think definitely if McLaren are in the top three, and they're chipping away at this Red Bull gap, and it's something that Christian Horner actually said pre-season. We're going to see the whole front of the field converge. We've not got this big advantage anymore, and I think as they've sort of assessed where Red Bull have been good, whether it be in the pit stops or strategy or tyre allocation, whatever, I think they've sort of cottoned onto it, and that's where they're chipping away at these little sort of gains, and and not just on the sort of car development side, but also just on the overall race weekend management.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, just expand on that point. What do you think has led to this gap closure? Really, do you think it's all the work McLaren have done behind the scenes? So obviously, I'm thinking of people like Rob Marshall coming in. I'm thinking of the wind tunnel going back to the MTC. Or do you think this is just sort of a natural progression over time that we're now into, what is it, the third season of this regulation set, and there's only so much Red Bull can be ahead? Which part of that do you think is probably the most influential and where we've seen McLaren cut the gap to Red Bull?
It's a very interesting one, isn't it? I think it's the amount of time that the regulations have been maintained, and although Red Bull had this massive gap over time, teams like McLaren have able to do their homework and close this gap kind of naturally. And I think as well that the driver lineup as well, that's got to play a massive part, because although Red Bull have a phenomenal driver in Max Verstappen, if they had two Sergio Perez's, they'd be in quite a fair bit of trouble. And actually, there probably would be a three-way fight at the top if they had two Perez's. So a lot of it's down to the drivers. But I think you mentioned about the gap between McLaren and the rest of the field, like Mercedes and Aston Martin. But yeah, I don't know what those two are doing, but they were very positive at the start of the season, and it's just seemed to kind of fallen apart for them now, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think, was it Roy said earlier that Ferrari had worked on a race execution, and I think Mercedes, that's probably their massive problem at the moment. They just cannot get that car in the right spot, can they? And that's been to McLaren's benefit. So yeah, I think I agree with both of you when I was sort of thinking that the top three has been quite clearly established, and then you've got essentially, what is it now? I mean, there's not really a midfield anymore, is it? As we sort of go from arguably Mercedes and Aston Martin all the way down to Williams or whatever. But yeah, there's definitely a gap forming up at the top, which is good for McLaren, obviously, but we'll see how the others catch up. As we're at Imola, obviously returning there, like I said, for the first time since 2021. I just want to touch on this little point because obviously it's 30 years since Ayrton Senna's death at the circuit. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about sort of his impact on the McLaren team, because obviously he won all his world titles with McLaren. He's obviously a huge driver, and obviously McLaren have had a lot of huge drivers over the years. And I think, we know that McLaren are going to do a special livery next week for Monaco's. Just Rory, what was in your mind, is there a bigger character in the McLaren history, maybe even more influential than Ayrton Senna was for them?
It's a toss up between him and Alan Prost, isn't it? I mean, those two are the big sort of rivals in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, and yeah, his legacy sort of transcends the sport, doesn't it? Especially in Brazil as well, where they sort of see, like Lewis Hamilton, for example, as the sort of second sort of character, sort of off the back of that. But yeah, I mean, he probably is one of the most important. I mean, you look at what they were doing on their social media this week, where they posted that setup sheet, I think it was, or the timing sheet, wasn't it, from Monaco, where it's him versus Prost. I can't remember what year it was. Was it 19?
I think it was 88 off the top of my head.
88, yeah, incredible, and you see, I think it was like a gap of like 52 seconds or 56 seconds and Prost managed to take off like 6 seconds off his lead, and then Ayrton responds, and then they both slow off, and then that's when you see actually Senna crash at Portier, as it were. So yeah, it's he's a big character, and you see that the run that Sebastian Vettel organised, or I think he organised it anyway today, where you got all the drivers involved, and it ended up pouring down with rain. By the looks of some of the images I've seen, but yeah, no, he's a big character, Senna, in the history, not just of McLaren but of Formula One.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would encourage everyone to sort of seek out that image on McLaren's Twitter feed. Like, I think we all know that Senna was a very meticulous driver, probably maybe one of the most meticulous drivers we've ever seen. Like, I think David Coulthard told a story once where he'd hop in, do a lap, and then sort of give his info, and Senna would still be there, sort of giving even more info. He was very much known for being essentially part engineer, part driver. Like, Paul, what about you? Sort of, where do you rank Senna in the great list of McLaren drivers?
Oh, I mean, Rory put it very well there, isn't it? I mean, Senna is definitely the more romantic, isn't he, of Senna and Prost. He's definitely, if you think of McLaren, you just think of that Marlboro red and white car with the yellow helmet, don't you? That's the epitome, isn't it? But it's also the more fashionable one. But I think Prost has been perhaps maybe done a disservice. I think a lot of people tend to forget him. Lego recently released that McLaren set. I don't know if you saw that. They did a big launch. And there was a huge fight in the comments with a load of people going, "Oh, where's the Prost set as well?" But I mean, he's definitely the most influential. He's probably still the most Senna's probably still the most valuable, or one of the most valuable entities McLaren has right now. Even to this day, they the amount of merch they sell, they've named a car after him. It will go on forever and ever and ever. And it is fantastic as well that you've got even drivers nowadays who weren't even alive when Senna was racing. I don't know if there were some of them born. Pierre Gasly's got his tribute helmet out. Vettel, who's obviously much older and everything. Racing, doing a demo of his car and everything. So it's fantastic that heritage is being continued as well. And it's a great time to do it as well at Imola. But while I'm here as well, let's not forget to give old Roland Ratzenberger a bit of a heads up as well, because he does get overshadowed.
Yeah, you're definitely right. Yeah, I think, unfortunately, obviously, the two horrific deaths that weekend, 30 years ago. Yeah, I must say also just a little bit of a teaser. I have seen the special livery McLaren have done for Monaco, and it's probably my favourite livery they've ever done. So I think that's coming out next week. So I'll tell everyone to keep an eye out for that. Last bit before we go, I just want to bring you up to date on some more McLaren news. I mean, this morning, it's being Thursday, we had some more announcements about McLaren's driver development program, which I think it's fair to say is probably one of the more interesting ones, definitely one of the more active ones over the last few years. We've heard a lot of new names arrive, and sort of the senior leaders gone as well. So we've got two new drivers, both F3 drivers, Alex Dunn, and I'm going to really make a pig's ear of this name, but Martinez Stenshorn is my best pronunciation of that. give you a little bit of background both of them. So Alex is an 18-year-old Irishman. He's had a promising career. He's done well in British F4 with high tech, and obviously he came second in the Italian F4 and the 2023 GB3 Championship. Martinez is sort of at a similar age, born into a rally family. Lots of karting championships, as you'd imagine, sort of all that kind of good stuff. Again, 18-year-old, he's Norwegian instead of the Irishman. So, I mean, Rory, it's hard to have an opinion on some guys that are so young, but it looks like another smart move from McLaren to get these guys sort of in the door. Maybe they won't end up in F1 one day, but as we know with McLaren, they've got a lot of racing series, and sort of, I'm sure they'll eventually find a home somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at they have teams in IndyCar and Formula E now as well, don't they, in Extreme E. So, there's definitely avenues for drivers to go, not just in Formula One, but, we've seen as well with F1 teams, their driver academies, how important they are to fostering their talent, but also, assessing their abilities and progressing through the ladder. That's it's a very key thing. That's, something like, Kimi Antonelli, for example, is coming through. So, yeah, it's very key signings, I would say.
Yeah, Paul, just on that point, how valuable do you think it is McLaren having this academy, or just essentially seats for drivers to racing? Because I'm going to bring up the example of Mercedes back in when it was Rosberg and Hamilton. I mean, this is like a story everyone knows by now, but they had a young guy sort of wanted to get into their team. He's very highly rated, and they didn't have a spot for him. And that young guy turned out to be Max Verstappen, which obviously I think Toto Wolff has many sleepless nights about what could have been. How big an asset do you think having this academy, which is obviously getting a lot of money put into it, but also, like Rory said, they've got so many series, so they can essentially get a driver a seat pretty much anywhere. Is that a real selling point for a team like McLaren?
Yes, it is, and I think it's invaluable for them to have these, young drivers on the books and in development. And it's a great way to kind of bring them up, I suppose, in the McLaren way of doing things. They can teach them a bit more thoroughly from a younger age, but also it's quite a convenient way to keep Red Bull and Ferrari's dirty hands off them as well. To keep these guys inside, and hopefully later you can promote them, or you can loan them out elsewhere. And there's all sorts of benefits to come with this as well. But it's in times like this where there's limited things like testing and things like this. It's just good to have these these young drivers on the books and inside the team, because you never know when they might actually come in handy.
Yeah, definitely, you're right on that. And yeah, just speaking of other McLaren series, one to keep an eye out for is obviously qualifying for the Indy 500 this weekend. So people like Pato Ward will be representing McLaren. I'm sure it'll be an interesting watch after we're done with the F1. Let's move on back to Imola a little bit and sort of away from McLaren. Roy, is there any sort of team away from the top three? We've spoken a lot about them, like maybe sort of your dark horse. I might throw some names out there. I mean, like you've got teams like Haas who've done well so far. You've got Alpine who did surprisingly well in Miami. Is there a team away from the big teams that you sort of keeping an eye out for?
Well, we'll see what Haas does with Kevin Magnussen, whether he's the rear gunner again for Nico Hulkenberg, and he racks up enough points to give Behrman a chance. I don't know. And then I think you look at Williams with they've just signed Alex Albon again, haven't they? They've extended his contract, so they're Williams are doing a lot, I think, to try and get themselves in a position now to score the points, because they know the car has potential. They've got this whole this whole weight saving sort of package they've got coming, haven't they, into the car? So yeah, I think the Williams are probably one to watch, and I would say Haas really, just because of their cunning plans, how they're able to somehow get points, conjure a point finish out of Nico Hulkenberg.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate for Magnussen, because I think every time he's at press conference, he gets asked about two questions and that's it. But today's, at least he was getting asked questions. Granted, they were all on the same topic, saying, "Are you going to be banned for Monaco?" He's hoping not. He's going to stop driving like a madman, really. Roy, I just want to pick up a subject you touched on there. Williams, would you say that Williams are sort of McLaren, but a few years before? I mean, McLaren obviously went through the sort of their transformation. Could you see Williams making sort of a similar, basically redesigning their whole team from the inside out and hoping that it gets much better on the track?
Yeah, exactly, because that's what they're doing in the background now. If you look at what James Vowles was sort of lobbying with the all the team bosses, he was trying to get them to increase the capital expenditure, which they ended up successfully doing, and that is what they're using to reinvest in all of their facilities. And you look at McLaren, 5 years ago they were saying all the same things about investing in this wind tunnel facility and all the other sort of bits and bobs they were doing around that. And I think the same is, as you say, happening for Williams right now. They're reinvesting in the team, and that's partially one of the reasons why Alex Albon has re-signed with them, because he believes in the project and he thinks that they're gonna go places. And it's being translated well on track, I would say, with the results. Even though this car hasn't scored a point yet, it will do it because it has potential. So I think they're not so many 5 years maybe down the line, they'll probably be in the same position as McLaren and back to the former sort of glory years.
Yeah, definitely an interesting one. Paul, I'm going to ask you on the Albon contract, but sort of the other way around. Is this a good move for Albon? Because obviously we heard a lot of rumours. I think he got linked to pretty much every team at one point or another. Do you think this was his best option in the end, or do you think he's been a bit safe by committing to Williams?
I think it's safe to say that he probably has had a look elsewhere. His agent wouldn't be a very good one if he wasn't knocking on doors and seeing what's around and what money's out there and everything. But I think considering what was potentially out there as an option, probably didn't look very good. And I think for him and what he has responded to in terms of management style, in terms of James Vowles, I think he's really brought the best out of him especially when you look back when he was at Red Bull. He was a mess. He was an absolutely broken shadow of a man. And now at Williams, he's almost a completely new guy. So I think he can be part of Williams long term. He can definitely, as Rory mentioned, if Williams get back up there and get points and podiums again, he can become one of their kind of key drivers in their, shall we say, journey back to the top. But it all depends as well on who is going to be next to him next year, because he's had quite an easy run having Latifi and Sargent as teammates. So that's going to be very interesting to see as we head into next year as well.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. Yeah, I think Logan Sargent was speaking today. He sort of seems like a man of a target on his back. And I think even he's starting to realize that. He said the next 3 or 4 races were very important. I mean, there's been a huge amount of rumours about Antonelli sort of being jumped into that seat, which would seem a little bit crazy. Obviously, he's only just started his F2 career, let alone moved any further than that. But one we will keep an eye out for. I mean, sure, there's plenty of more driver moves to come between now and the end of the year. Let's end on our predictions then. Rory, I'm going to ask you for your top 3. Who's finishing on the podium?
I think definitely we'll see Max back up there winning the race. Probably. Sorry to give you the boring sort of results of everyone. And then I think Ferrari will be there as well with Leclerc or Sainz. I think it'll be quite a big surprise actually if Sainz does manage to outclass Leclerc again on track. And then we could see McLaren get in there with Norris.
Yeah, definitely. It's obviously a home race for Ferrari as well. Paul, what about you? Who's going to be on your top 3 steps?
I think we should make a rule where we can't say Max.
Yeah, so I ask you your 2nd, 3rd and 4th? Because that's probably more interesting.
I think the way it's looking, I think we will definitely see a McLaren on the podium in some shape or form. Definitely, I think the way things are going, I definitely see a Ferrari. I think Sainz will be going hell for leather because he wants to make it 2-0 to Leclerc. He wants to win the Imola Grand Prix. I know I mentioned that thing about Max, but I think in my heart of hearts, I am going to go with Max, Sainz, and I'm going to go. Actually, I'm going to mix those. I'm going to go Max, Sainz, and I'm going to go Piastri 3rd.
Oh, interesting. That'd be fascinating. I'm very similar to you. I'm gonna swap up Piastri for Norris, but other than that, I entirely agree with your suggestions. But we shall see. Obviously, race on Sunday, so we'll have the reaction to all of that on Sunday evening. But my thanks to you two once again for joining. I'm sure we'll get you on the pod later in the season again. But yeah, enjoy the race and thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Cheers very much. Enjoy.
So there you have it. That's your preview for the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. And no, I'm not going to say the big long name again. My thanks go to both Rory and Paul for joining me today, and I've put all the links to their work in the description down below, so make sure you check that out. Like I said, we're going to be back Sunday evening for a full race recap, But in the meantime, make sure you subscribe to us on your favourite podcast platform, give us a rating, and also you can follow us on social media at Pondering Papaya. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you Sunday.